Okay, and welcome. I'm going to be talking about my games from the Sligo weekender that just passed. There were five sections, and I was playing in the top section, and I was the top seed for the event. Although there were a few players of very similar strength to me, so it was going to be very difficult to win the event. I'll be talking about my experience, trying to give some insight into the psychology within the game, some of the things under the surface, my approach, the things I was thinking about, and what I think my opponents were thinking about. I'm going to start with this first game that took place on the Friday night. Of course, you're going to be quite tired playing this game after a long journey, and also to get paired against a young player who's going to be very well prepared. Um, it's become so difficult to play against players like this because you know that they're going to be preparing deeply against your online games, against your games in the database. And it's so easy to prepare nowadays, even in a short space of time, with the access to the engines, the access to resources, and with a bit of creativity, you can come up with very good ideas on your own. Whereas if you play against players from a previous generation, they're quite happy to play their usual openings, and they're not going to really look into what you do so much. So your approach needs to be different for those games. And we'll see games like that in this event. But for the first game, I was quite concerned, and I knew I needed to be careful in the opening. My opponent played e4. I played e5 on the basis that I expected him to play the Spanish. It's where he had some games. And against the Spanish, I can really dodge a little bit easier. There are different systems for black that are working okay. But he played the Scotch. Maybe he had seen some games I had in the Scotch and he felt kind of encouraged. Here, it's a little bit harder for black to make things difficult for the opponent. A lot of the lines are very forcing, and black doesn't have a huge amount of options here. Knight f6 is the main line, but it's quite drawish, and white can try some very interesting ideas. And black needs to remember quite a lot. Bishop c5 is the old move. We could get bishop e3, queen f6, c3. Or we could get knight b3. And this is the kind of thing I would be more worried about, because after bishop b6, white is quite an easy plan of just bringing the pieces out, gaining space on the king side, and castling long. Black doesn't have obvious pawn breaks, and doesn't have a clear attack on the queen side. So in a human game, it's not so easy to play these positions, and this line with knight b3 has become very popular for white. Instead, I played queen f6. Now knight b3 isn't really a topic, and if bishop e3, I can play bishop c5. The downside with queen f6 is supposed to be this move, knight to b5. And it makes sense for white, they're just trying to take this pawn. I go bishop c5. If they take, I go king d8 with a double attack. Here and here. Instead, queen e2 comes to defend the pawn on f2. And now I can defend the pawn on c7. Now white comes with knight c3. Knight d5 is a big idea, so I need to go knight ge7. If white plays knight d5, I can take, and even though it looks like I'm in some trouble with check, attack the knight, I thought I can come back here. The engine points out that king d8 is very strong with the idea of rook e8, which makes sense too. Instead, white plays the main line bishop e3, so I think both players here are still in their preparation. And I played this move bishop a5, which is theory, just to keep everything protected. Otherwise, white is going to take and take on c7. And now white plays long castles. Here is where I really needed to start playing accurately. Castles, while a natural move, is really the wrong direction, because now white takes the initiative. Knight d5, take, and now white starts pushing me around a little bit, pushing these pawns, and I have not so much space, no clear plans, and for white, after g4, there's a possibility I'm just going to get rolled on the king side. My queen is also really rapidly running out of space. Because it's a very forcing line, I need to play extremely critically and very carefully. And here it makes sense to include this forcing move a6. The reason why people might not play this move if they don't know the position very well is they might see this move knight d5 and become a little bit concerned because they see this. Take, and there's suddenly an attack on the knight and a discovered attack. However, I vaguely remembered from my preparation some position somewhere where I could take the piece and the discovered check didn't matter so much, and at the end of the day it was some kind of equal endgame. And sure enough, that was the case here. But I still needed to spend quite some time in the game to verify my suspicions, because if it was just one little nuance and there was some other move I needed to include, I could just be losing. a6 is good though. And of course the main move is knight d5 with 92% of games continuing this way. But then there's 3 games in the database with knight d4, which is actually the best move. People don't usually play it because they would be naturally quite concerned about incurring this damage on the queen side. However, white is making a clear argument. It's difficult for black to exploit the weakness on the queen side because the weakness is on dark squares. And in order to give white these weaknesses, we had to give away our dark squared bishop. However, the real nature of black's advantages here on the queen side is more long-term. Long-term the king is weak, but also long-term the structure is weak. Long-term the c4 square is weak. Long-term the c5 square is weak. These are squares where white can't kick us away. So we can enjoy this position quite a lot if we get to the long term. But in order to get to the long term, we need to spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that nothing bad happens to us in the short term, which it easily could, because you see for white the easy play that they have on the king side. So I started with this move queen g6 to prevent, I thought, f4. If I play something like castles, I was quite concerned about f4. Interestingly, the computer isn't, and gives this brilliant move knight takes d4. We wouldn't usually want to do this because you'd think c takes d4 is quite an improvement for white. However, this little move queen e6, and I'm attacking 2 pawns. The e4 pawn is more important, so white should defend it. And now the engine line is quite fantastic here. It could be a perpetual, or I could play on. Something like this. I need to defend this against the bishop and the queen. And here, black is a tiny bit better. But who knows what's going on. Luckily, I played queen g6 instead, and things were a bit more calm. My opponent defended their e-pawn with bishop f4. Here I played d6, and I was very happy to get this included. Because, well, I want my pawns on dark squares. I have the light square bishop and the 2 knights. My opponent has the knight and 2 bishops. So I need to fill in the gaps on the dark squares, basically. Make it easier for my bishop to go around the place. h4. And here, I think this is where simple decision making can help us a bit. It's very easy here to get lost in the position and to get lost in calculation, to get lost in plans. Really, the only thing we need to think about in this position is, should we allow white to play pawn to h5? After some reflection, I decided the answer to that question was no. Therefore, I should play h5 myself. This is to ensure the stability of my queen on g6. It remains outposted, it remains secure. Now white plays queen e3. This is where we need to pay attention to what our opponent's idea is. And I had expected this move, because white wants to play bishop d3 to try to exploit my queen's position. I thought bishop d7 was a natural move, but I became a little concerned after bishop d3. Of course, it makes so much sense for me to play knight to e5, and to prevent white pushing the pawn to e5. However, I saw that they could take and play knight f5, and after some exchanges on f5, there's going to be some queen takes e5 at some point. And that's taking advantage of the fact that I haven't castled yet. So I decided straight away I should play knight e5 and make the position fixed as early as possible. In this game, I used a lot of kind of rules to help guide my decision making. One of the rules I'm using here is the knights prefer a fixed position. A fixed position is one where pawn breaks are not readily available. Bishops enjoy, an open game, pawn breaks everywhere, weaknesses appearing everywhere. The knights just want something quite fixed where they can start to maneuver around and exploit weak squares. Here my opponent played in quite a forcing manner, which is quite typical of the lower seed in general in chess. They like to force the play because they don't really trust themselves to play a standard position over several moves. For example, white could just play this position with f3, and something like this would happen. Both sides would be wriggling about, slowly improving their position. Nothing much would be going on. It's hard to believe either side is better here. It just seems quite equal. Although I prefer black. I mean, at some point g5 might happen after I castle long, put some rooks over here, g5 comes, we do something on the king side. But okay, it's a very stable position for both sides. Instead, my opponent tried to force the play. Bishop takes e5 is a concession. So I'm thinking here, okay, if I can absorb the pressure after knight f3, I have improved my position quite considerably. One reason is I have the better bishop. My bishop is, technically speaking, the good bishop because my structure is going to be on dark squares. The opposite can be said for white's bishop. Here, the natural move is f6, but I became concerned after bishop c4 that queen c5 would come and my king would be stuck in the middle. White would improve and I would have a very unpleasant situation. For example, bishop d7, white doubles the rooks, there's queen a7 there. It doesn't look very healthy for black. I didn't notice here that I had queen h... Oh, never mind. Let's get back to that. We're having technical difficulties here, but that's okay. We get a bit of a recap of how we got here. Knight e5 takes, knight f3. And now f6. I didn't notice that after bishop c4 I had this move queen h6. When black's king safety stops becoming an issue, then black can enjoy the long-term benefits much easier. The exchange of the queens is a big step towards the long term. And in the long term here, black is having all the fun because of the structure. In the game I played knight c6, and I thought this was a very elegant move because of what happened in the game. White played queen c5. Here I used some sort of strategic thinking. Strategy is a lot about noticing that your opponent has a good piece and noticing that you have a bad piece and deciding to exchange those pieces. Here the queen on c5 is very powerful. It's outposted on a dark square. It's very difficult for me to oust it. And my queen is sidelined and not really doing anything. So queen e6, bishop c4, queen e7 removes white's queen. If white's queen wants to remain on the board, my queen will become the good queen and their queen will become the bad queen. If they exchange, then I've solved my problem. Instead of this, white had the move bishop c4. I don't really want to castle here because I think things are going to open up against my king. What I wanted to do here was to play bishop e6, and I thought this was going to be a very nice solution. I was even thinking that if they go bishop b3, I have different options here. Maybe I take and go a5, a4, this kind of thing. But I realized to my horror that white had this move bishop d5. I realized this before they made a decision whether to go queen c5 or bishop c4. Once I saw this, I was basically filled with dread, because I can't play f6, bishop on e6 hangs. Otherwise, white is going to take on c6 and then take on e5. If I take on d5, things open up and my e5 pawn will fall. So really, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And I certainly can't go bishop e6. So I was really hoping they wouldn't play bishop c4, because even if they hadn't seen this idea of bishop d5, I can't really in good conscience play bishop e6 in this position and allow this bishop to be screwed into the d5 square. Luckily, my opponent played queen c5. And it's this bit of good fortune that can turn a slightly shaky start to the event into a successful one. Queen e6, bishop c4, queen e7. Queen e7, king e7, bishop d5. Now white simply wants to take and take on e5. So I need to secure my f6, or I need to secure my e5 pawn with f6. Now they take to equalize the structure. However, they haven't equalized the balance of material, as I have the bishop against the knight. This is where we're back into the idea of rules. Rules that help govern our decisions and evaluation. Here, there are pawns on both sides of the board. Therefore, it should favour the bishop. If the game is stretched from one side to the other, meaning that if there's targets on one side and targets on the other side, the bishop is enjoying this a lot more than the knight. The knight prefers to operate in a fixed and narrow sort of space, where it can hop around and start to target squares, but the bishop likes to operate backwards and forwards and across both sides of the board. So after knight d2, bishop e6, I'm already kind of controlling this knight, and my bishop is complementing the structure. It gives me control of many squares. So I'm kind of monopolizing control here. Knight to b3. White is trying to use this weak c5 square, which I understood was a problem. However, I can kind of play around this. The mentality here, especially as the higher rated player who wants to win the position, is how do we push? We need a lot of determination and a lot of resilience in these situations. Not to lose hope and to keep coming up with ideas to put pressure on our opponents. Because players of this level, with the white pieces, or in general, are very good at solving problems. They're very good at identifying what your idea is and preventing it. This is why it's important when you're trying to put pressure on players to play flexibly so as to have multiple ideas. They can prevent one idea and incur some compromises in doing so. But then I can choose from a whole list of ideas based on what they do, and that's what's going to unlock them. So I don't want to play too, obviously. I want to play in a flexible way to try and disbalance them. The first thing we should do in any kind of random endgame position like this is we should improve our most powerful pieces first to the maximum. Once they are improved, or if they are improved to the maximum, then we move down the list to the second most powerful piece, the third most powerful piece, and then once all the most powerful pieces are at their maximum, then we use the pawns as tools to break our opponent's position and to help us with infiltration and to help us to get to targets. For example, here, infiltration is possible on the B file, and the target is on A2. Pressure needs to go this way, and the key to unlock everything is the A pawn, because the A pawn will disbalance the outposted knight. Outposted knights in open positions, once evicted, become incredibly unstable and almost become targets. Rook hb8, king d2, a5, rook b1. This is where we need some resilience, because we might think in this position we're nearly there. Once we kick this knight away, we'll win a pawn. Once we win a pawn, we're going to be happy. But our opponent solves the problem. If we go a4, knight c5, rook b1, bishop a2, rook a1. And now there's no way to keep the a pawn. And I'm not going to be able to win this position. So I need to find a better idea. You can have a think here from the black side, what should black do to try and increase the pressure? And you can pause the video if you'd like. And now I'll explain what I was thinking. The rook on a8 is overloaded. This way and that way. In fact, it's even possible that there could be some knight takes a5 at some point with some knight c6, this kind of thing. There's a tactical kind of liability here. Also, the rook on a8 is not really ideally placed. After rook b6, I outpost my rook. That takes some of the pressure off the a8 rook. It can come over here at some point, and it supports the a pawn. This rook can now take care of itself. King d3. The knight's coming back. Rook b8. f3. Now I go a4. And this is what's going to disbalance white. Because after knight d2, bang, bang, bang. Knight a3, c4 is coming, so I must retreat. c4. And now I had anticipated this position from quite far back. And now we're back to rules. So, we've got some motifs here. One of the motifs is opposition. The kings are in opposition. If white plays king d3, I play king b4, and I should win. If white plays king b2, I play king d4, and I should win. The knight and the bishop are in opposition against this pawn. But the bishop is better at waiting than the knight. The bishop can wait without losing control of the squares it was originally controlling. The same is not true for the knight. The knight cannot wait without relinquishing control of all the squares that it was controlling. So I can go here, 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 and I will still be controlling c4. But the knight in waiting loses control of c4. g3. And now we just need to create Zugzwang. So g5 is one way to do this. He tried g4, but it doesn't work because I'm going to get there first. So he resigned. Otherwise, they would have to give way. And after they lose this pawn, then other pawns are going to be next, most likely. And with this distraction, my king is going to come in. I hope that this game was an interesting example of this kind of pairing. And we'll look at some different games as we go along. I'll see you next time.